Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day.
Okay, and we are back. Did you take a scoop of water? Do you want to do that? I'm going to do that, actually.
Yeah. Should we wait till the street cleaner's done going by?
No, it's beautiful. It's part of the ambience.
Oh, I love it.
Hello and namaste, and welcome to another episode of The Documentary Life, a podcast that sets out to inspire and educate each and every one of us on what it means, as well as how to best lead a documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and I want to thank you for listening to this show and for living your own documentary life. In 2009, I set out to begin filming on what would become my documentary directorial debut, a film called Journey to Kathmandu. I went to film an annual trek that goats would make from their farmland lives in Tibet, all the way through the Himalaya mountains to their sacrificial deaths in Kathmandu, Nepal, during the all-important Nepalese holiday known as Dasai. It was a special time for me. I had been working for 2 years holding fundraisers, applying for grants, amassing the required film gear, getting myself into trekking shape, and reading as much material and watching as many documentaries as I could get my hands on that pertained to the country of Nepal. I would spend nearly 3 months with one particular family, the Arials, who were from the Gorkha region, but ran their small tea shop in the heart of Kathmandu city. I was honored and fortunate enough to spend time with Prem, his wife Goma, and their 2 children, Kapil and Kopila, whether it was in and around their tiny shop in Kathmandu or up in the mountains of Gorkha with their extended family during the festival time. And while I'm very happy with the film itself, ultimately it's the time that I shared with the Arial family, the time that I spent with my local crew up in the Himalayas filming herds of goats, that I'll always cherish the most. And that's the funny thing about documentary filmmaking. Oftentimes, at least in my experience, the film itself almost takes the back seat, secondary to the actual experience of the making of the film. The time spent with the families whose stories you were so delicately capturing, and of course later on weaving together, as well as the local people that you would work with during the course of filming. So I was very excited and greatly looking forward to having a conversation with today's guest, who not only makes his living telling the stories of people from other parts of the world, but in this case, with he and his wife, they spent time in Nepal making their first feature documentary, a film called Drawing the Tiger. There will be a few main topics of discussion today. Firstly, we're going to delve into what it's like logistically and creatively to work in a developing country. In today's case, we'll be talking about Nepal, a country that both myself and my guest have spent significant amounts of time working in. Secondly, we're going to discuss what it's like working creatively and professionally with your significant other. And lastly, we'll get into how sometimes one's documentary film can be the catalyst for some other venture or calling that they hadn't anticipated. Of course, as is always the case with this show, we'll not be limited by these chosen topics. They shall just provide us some guideposts for the show's content. And as I tend to recommend when one is making a documentary film, we'll remain open to the possibilities that the road might just take us to places we'd never anticipated. Today's guest's name is Scott Squire. Scott and his wife, Amy, are based out of Seattle, Washington, where they run the content creating production company, Nonfiction Media. They are the filmmaking team behind last year's award-winning documentary, Drawing the Tiger, a film which was shot entirely in the South Asian country of Nepal, a country which many of my listeners may already be somewhat familiar with from hearing me talk about it on this program.
Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to be joined today by fellow documentary lifer, Scott Squire. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Yeah, happy to be here, Chris.
Right from the outset, something I want to mention is that there's an obvious connection between you and I that we share, which is that we both shot documentaries in Nepal. I'd like to mention really quick how you and I sort of first met, albeit in the virtual sense, through a good friend of mine and colleague, who I believe you and Amy may have met last year at and help me remember the name of the documentary workshop that would have been in or near Portland.
Yeah, it was just I who was there. It was at Oregon Documentary Camp
Yes.
at Silver Falls, I think, outside of Portland.
Right, in
there.
Silver Falls, beautiful area.
Whew, boy, oh boy.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. He had seen Drawing the Tiger, and a couple of months ago had brought it to my attention, and he asked me if I had seen it, and I wasn't aware of the film at the time. So because of the connection that I had with Nepal, and because you guys were just up here in Seattle, I thought that I'd reach out, talk to you guys, and again, I'm happy to be here and happy to be meeting you and discussing not only your guys' film, but of course your time in Nepal, and then a few of these other sort of subjects that we'll touch upon. The way that I understand it is Drawing the Tiger did not initially start out as a documentary film, per se. You didn't set out to make this film. It happened in a sort of maybe backdoor or circuitous way. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, how it came to be?
In 2007, Amy and I went in search of the story that we could tell, sort of our own personal bent. We wanted to tell the story we could tell that would most illuminate the value of girls' education as a place to focus our resources, primarily in the developing world. But wherever you look, you can see the value of particularly girl-focused education efforts. At that time in 2007, we were pretty freshly minted production company owners, and we wanted to go do a big banner project.
Yeah.
And so we started asking around, and pretty shortly we were introduced to a fellow who runs an organization out of California that has a component in Nepal that gives scholarships to poor girls to study in the capital city, Kathmandu.
Right.
So we were contracted to make a sort of a 30-minute promotional tract for this organization, primarily to give to their donors and prospective donors. It's bread and butter for guys like you and me a lot of the time.
Pretty classic.
We went over there, spent like a good long time on the ground. I mean, we were there for 2.5 months at that time. A month of that was a trek, so we accompanied a bunch of high-dollar donors on a big trek. But the time that we spent filming on the ground, three really solid weeks. 4 if you take, finding our way.
Yeah.
4 weeks, I guess, filming. Yeah. So we did sort of day in the life stories of 3 girls, and we ended up shooting actually 5, but we featured 3 day in the life stories, each of which took a couple of days to film. Okay. And then we went a little bit deeper with a couple of them, and one of them was Shanta, this young woman who ultimately became the primary subject of Drawing the Tiger. And what happened was we just really clicked with this girl. We resolved that even after we're back in the States, we've completed our contract with this organization, we're going to continue telling the story, because we felt like we've locked into the very avatar of the positive possibilities of globalization.
Let me just stop you just for a second. For clarification for my listeners, tell us again that this was indeed a commissioned project initially. And did you complete your responsibility on the commissioned project and then decided to move to your project? I was like, how did that? Okay.
Exactly right. While we were in the field, Amy and I realized, okay, this is the stuff we want to be in. This is the story we want to be telling, and we may or may not get support from the organization that we're here contracted to work with. We're going to go home, fulfill our contract to them, deliver on the promise that we made to them, and give them the pieces that they're asking for, and then we're going to continue it. Jumping off from the footage that we had already shot,
Right.
leveraging the relationships we'd already started up
Built,
there
yeah.
with subjects, with translators, with families, with even at that point, the value of having a taxi driver that
Yeah.
you
of
know,
course. He's going to pick up the phone when I call,
Yeah.
and he or she will be there.
So came home, resolved to continue on our own,
Yeah.
and set about kind of trying to figure out how to fund that, how to make that happen logistically. Fired off some grant applications,
Yeah.
started talking about it and building out the ideas and writing and planning and doing treatments and seeking advice of people more senior documentary filmmakers
Totally.
than we, and just So there's a big spoiler that I have to figure out how to talk around.
Exactly. And how are you dealing with that in the media, this idea of a spoiler? I knew about it because I read about it. Have you guys made a conscious effort to avoid that, or are you letting people know? Yeah, how are you working with that?
Yeah, well,
sort of-
for your listeners, Chris, I don't think it's
Yeah.
good. I don't think I need to be coy about
Yeah.
the fact that our subject changed. Our principal subject, just about the time that we had a grant a grant fulfilled, we were awarded a grant that would enable us to go back to Nepal.
Right.
We got a phone call from the executive director of the organization that we had worked for. He called to let us know that our main subject, Shanta, had died by her own hand. And would we please, as soon as possible, create a version of the documentary we'd created for him without her, just take her out, strike that one girl. And of course, it was a crushing. We were really emotionally involved, and continue to be really emotionally involved with this girl, and Shanta's death really, really rocked us. It threw Amy in particular for a real loop.
Yeah.
We did that work. We filled that out, and as soon as we could, we took that grant money and went over there. Amy went over right away within just a couple of weeks of learning of her death, and talked with her family and tried to. We didn't know. So really what this becomes is a story about what happens as a documentarian when your story, the rug of your story, just gets pulled out from under you.
Right. And meanwhile, you're also dealing with this, if you will, a client relationship, right? You've created a piece of work that you've made, you fulfilled your commitment to this particular NGO, and then they're asking you to perhaps recut something that's already been done.
Right.
So how are you dealing with that, and then dealing with, okay, now we know that our story has changed drastically. We want to follow this story in as compassionate as a way as we can, and then you're also kind of dealing with this other NGO relationship. How do you do that?
It was a fairly straightforward ask that they made. We didn't like to remove Shanta from the materials.
Yeah.
We wanted, in our perfect world, Amy and my feelings about it were, if you have integrity, you will embrace this as an opportunity to learn.
Of course, right.
But I don't presume to make those sorts of decisions for the leadership of an NGO, particularly not a client, and it's not our place.
Yeah.
So we did the work, we fulfilled that, and they paid us. We asked.
Right.
They asked how much is it going to cost you to do this, and they paid us. They did also say, "Oh, by the way, you can't use any of the footage that you shot." We went ahead and used it. The contractual language, such as it was casual enough that they didn't have any rights to the footage that we had shot.
How do you best handle that kind of a situation that allows you to continue making the film that you need to make? How do you handle it? It's an incredibly delicate situation.
A lot of filmmakers, a lot of would-be, will-be, wanna-be, gonna-be filmmakers, and a lot of mid-career filmmakers do stuff for NGOs. And
Right.
the price of admission is high very often because you don't get paid like you do for a commercial gig. But what they can offer is pre-existing relationships, access, that's what we fetishize. We want to get close to people. I think that's why we do this work.
Yeah, right.
We want to understand how people communicate with one another, and we want to be in their lives, and we want to know people that we wouldn't know otherwise. So in return for doing this work for very little money for nonprofits, we need to be sure that we're going to own the work that we do. Some of it's going to be proprietary, but I would say just like don't sign work for hire contracts with your NGO clients.
Right.
Make sure that, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to take a cut in pay. I'm going to own the copyright. The releases are going to be on my letterhead. The material I shoot is going to be mine should I choose to leverage it forward.
Right. You make sure that you, in essence, as a filmmaker, you own that footage.
Right. We didn't do that exactly, but we also didn't sign anything that was work for hire per se.
Right.
So there was a very casual contractual arrangement between us and the nonprofit that we worked for that ended up working in our favor in the sense that they didn't have a leg to stand on should they have wished to actually litigate.
Right. It's helpful to sort of hear that because a lot of us can find ourselves in a situation where suddenly, after years of a passion project, suddenly that the footage is taken from us, or we can't even get out the door with our edited rough cut or whatever the case may be. And anything to help people sort of avoid those sorts of things, I'm all about.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Everybody, by the time you're 15 or so, you've probably had some experience with suicide around you. Unfortunately, it's prevalent enough across human experience that most people have been touched by it at some point in their life, and the closer that touch is, temporally, emotionally, the more problematic it can be to have somebody else's suicide drop in your lap in the middle of a story you've become invested in with a character you've become invested in. We really constructed the story so that it mirrored the arc of our, I say our, I mean mine and Amy's, journey with the characters, with the arc of the story. So we went in kind of naively, kind of excited about the potential, and fell in love with this character and began to see what possibilities she had in her life.
Yeah.
And then bang, it's cut short. And then in real life we didn't really know where we were going. We just knew we had to keep telling her story. We had promised Shanta we were telling her story. We would tell her story.
Yeah. And
we couldn't not do that. It was compulsive. I mean, in that passion project way. I wouldn't have been doing that if we felt like we had a choice.
I had alluded earlier, probably in the introduction, about how oftentimes a project as a filmmaker can lead to something that we may certainly not have known prior to, whether it's an endeavor, whether it's another project, whether it's in yours and Amy's case, the content matter of your film and what transpires in your film would lead you to this education program that you guys have embarked upon. I was going to get to that later, but that segue was so halfway decent that why don't we just talk about that now?
Here's to halfway decent segues.
Yeah.
Last fall in November, we had the great honor of taking the film back to Kathmandu for a couple of screenings. It screened at the Kathmandu International Mountain Film Festival and at Film South Asia, both of which are well-regarded South Asian festivals.
Absolutely.
And while we were there, we hustled the thing around and talked with a lot of people, and through a connection at the U.S. Embassy and through a connection that we'd made ahead of time on the suicide awareness tip. Should we wait till the street cleaner's done going by?
No, it's beautiful. It's part of the ambience.
Oh, I love it.
For our listeners, we're actually in a fairly historic building in Seattle, very close to Safeco Field and CenturyLink. This is tell me the name of the building. Inscape.
It's called Inscape Arts.
Yeah,
and it's an artist art studios building that's made from the old Immigration Naturalization Services West Coast Depot, which was decommissioned, I think, in the late 90s.
Yeah.
It's been just sitting here, excuse me, it's been sitting here just more or less empty for several years until it was developed a few years ago, and we've been having our studios here since it opened.
Amazing. I think it's an entirely appropriate place for people like you and I to be doing our work.
That's a wonderful spot. I feel
It's
really
awesome.
lucky to be here.
Yeah, for sure. And so if you hear noises in the background, it's because Scott and I have the windows open because this is a particularly hot weekend in the Pacific Northwest. So we will deal with some background noise. Please continue, Scott.
So we hooked up with a suicide researcher. Ashley Hageman is a PhD candidate, suicide researcher who was working on a project partly funded by Fulbright, and who worked with us to pull clips and create presentations to bring pieces of our film to groups of students in Kathmandu. And while we were there, I think Amy and Ashley had 3 or 4 presentations, which were really well received. But the audiences largely of high school aged or young college aged women were just rapt, just blown away, and their teachers also were interested to learn just the very idea of suicide awareness, of the fact that there might be a hotline that you could call if you were thinking about suicide or if you had questions about suicide, was entirely new and really exciting. It seemed really clear that there are a lot of people thinking about suicide with no outlet, and so that's a jumping off point for what we think is probably our biggest make the film work project, is to get it going as part of to build out a suicide awareness and prevention curriculum that we can send out in Nepal. Nepal, I don't know, not everybody understands, but Nepal is enormously decentralized. There's one capital city, there's sort of 3 principal cities, but most of the country lives in, huge, I think 29 or 30 million people live in Nepal, and of those, kind of 4 million live in cities, and the other 26 million people live in small villages. Maybe, between a few hundred and a few thousand people spread across hills, and most people are subsistence farmers, live by subsistence agriculture, and they don't have a central government, they don't have a really centralized media even. The experience of the average Nepali, their ability to receive programmatic information from a central government or from a cultural center is so much less than what we're used to.
And that's even putting it mildly, right? I think it was one of the things that, and this is now we are coming back to your film and some of the content and some of the beauty of it. I feel like that was one of the things that spoke to me the most about seeing your guys' film was that I haven't been back to Nepal since 2013. It's been a few years. And upon seeing your film, the next morning when I woke up, and I told Steph this, I said, Steph, I feel like I've been back to Nepal. The sounds, the visuals, the way that you had the story cut, the way that you told the story itself was very much in line with how I felt, granted being a Westerner through my lens, how I felt like life worked in those parts of Nepal. I felt like in watching your film, and I'm getting off path here, I don't mean to, but I felt like in watching your film, almost every step of the way, I was like, yup, that happens, yup, that's exactly the way that works, that's how that happens. And ironically, in some ways, for your audience, it could, I would think, as a filmmaker, it can almost work against you because it's not a happy, super upbeat film. But my God, as a documentary filmmaker, it was pretty damn close to perfection in the way that it was told, the way that it was executed, and the way that I know, in my experiences at least, that's how it is in Nepal. And you guys just turned the lens to it and did a wonderful job of it.
Thank you, Chris. It's very gratifying to hear you say, because that's what we wanted to do. We knew when you go, okay, our subject killed herself.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to have the triumphal arc of the promise of girls' education,
Right.
Building out the dream of globalization. This is not the film that we ended up with, and we just fell into this amazing relationship with this family, and the film that we ended up with is hugely intimate. I mean, I remain so excited about the relationship that we forged with the family, with Shanta's family, and as time has gone on, in a way, not to take anything away from her part in it, but she is less the anchor of the story and the family in general. It's a family love story. It's a globalization family epic. In any epic, there's tragedy and.
Have they seen the film, Scott?
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh.
Please share that.
Well, so before this is kind of crazy. So a little more than a year ago is when there was a big earthquake in Nepal. A couple of big earthquakes. The day before the first earthquake, our Nepali co-director Ramyata Limbu, who's super badass in Nepal, she's just kind of owns journalism in Nepal in a real important way. Ramyata, she was in the village showing the film to the family and to select people in the village who had been in the film or had questions about it. And she sent us this report, this really glowing report of how the family felt. We were, of course, a little bit nervous because they're very vulnerable. It's a very raw document, and people are shown in sometimes not their best lights. And we aren't scandal mongering by any means, but we also aren't paving over the parts where people are jerks to each other or have bad feelings, and they speak very candidly about it.
Absolutely.
And the upshot of what they said, and they said this to us as well when we came back in November. They said, it's a little bit, it feels kind of funny, but the fact is we see what you're doing here, and this is us. This is truth. And when we got that email from Ramyata letting us know essentially that they didn't have any beef with the story, but more to the point that they really did get it as well as we thought they did, get what we were doing, and that they had this really evolved understanding of our relationship with them and the reason that we were there. It felt so it really put some wind in our sails. It made us feel like, okay, we're not, this isn't all presumptuous folly. We aren't just foreigners with enough money to have some cameras who are curious and indulging our curiosity upon them. We just happen to have this oddball and somehow beautifully functional little connection with this one family that's being affected by these big winds of globalization. That's just how we have our finger on the pulse of it.
Yeah. I can imagine how incredibly gratifying and satisfying as a filmmaker to be putting that much work into telling the story of a family and to have their response be the way that they responded. Because it's one thing to tell the story of a family. It's another in another culture, in a developing country, and have them not only understand what you're trying to achieve, but also to then embrace it. That's not easy to do. That's really not easy to do. Now I come from an editing background, so as a storyteller, I think like, as a director, I think like an editor. That's because I've edited for years. That's what I've done. That was my bread and butter for a while. And when I saw your film, I was absolutely taken with the editing.
First off, Fiona Otway, who's edited Hell and Back Again, and Iraq in Fragments.
Yep. Did you guys know her from Seattle?
We knew her from here,
the doc community. Okay.
We knew her from Seattle's documentary community.
Yeah.
And when we came to Seattle, she was one of the first people that we met, and she was at that point, 2005. We came to Seattle. She had already finished Iraq in Fragments, which we had seen before we met her.
Okay.
And even before Amy and I were identifying as filmmakers, we both tripped about specifically the editing of that film, James Longley's film Iraq in Fragments, which also takes a very different approach to a category of story than what's customary.
Right.
And we just loved that. We love how Amy and I have spent time in the Middle East, and it was really key to be able to see day-to-day Iraqi life presented in an authentic way that was respectful of human beings living in these realities, where there's a war visited upon them by our country.
Right.
And the editing of that film just blew us away. Before we even really knew that we were being blown away by the editing, we were like, oh my God, that film was edited so amazingly.
Yeah.
And then we met the editor, Fiona, and just sort of looked at ourselves and were like, when we do film, she's going to cut it.
That's incredible. For the listeners of this program, I've seen 3 of the films that she has cut now. And there's a connection through a dear friend of mine who lives out of Brooklyn. He had mentioned Fiona's name a number of times because they're good friends and they're colleagues. So I know of Fiona through my friend, and then through Iraq in Fragments, and through Hell and Back Again. And now that I've heard the praise over the past few years from my friend, now that I've seen 3 films that I've absolutely loved the editing of, I feel like I have maybe the feeling that you guys had years ago. And if Fiona ever gets ears to this podcast, we're coming for you. Yeah, she's tremendous, an amazing storyteller. I would love to have her as a guest sometime.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, the degree of investment of heart that Fiona brought to this process, and the breadth of her understanding of what goes into an edit, astonished me. I mean, it just astonished me. Her investment, that I just can't say enough. I mean, I can't say enough about it, and she knows that I'll praise her to the moon.
Yeah.
So I won't embarrass her, even if she does get ears on this thing.
You guys had the discussion about who your audience is. Did she have input as an editor who she felt like the audience was? Or because she was sort of in your employ, if you will, was she asking you, tell me who your audience is, and I'll cut to that. I'll make the story to that.
We didn't ever have that conversation per se. The conversation we had was, let's make the story. Let's do everything we can to make each of these characters as perfectly authentic as possible, given what you have in the can. Render their relationships as truthfully, as authentically as possible. I mean, our mandate and that which Fiona both brought and took. Like, she came in. That's why she came, is because that authenticity is king mindset.
Yeah.
And what we strove for every day in the edit was, who is this person? Building the film to the audience. We didn't build the film to the audience. We just built the film to be its most drawing the tigerish self. Like it, we just kept asking the film what it wanted, what it needed to be, what it was, and making it closer and closer to that.
What is it like to be working with one's partner? In your case, Amy, your wife. How did you guys come to work together on this particular project then?
I went to journalism school, master's degree journalism school at University of California at Berkeley in 2001, and Amy was teaching. She's a very accomplished teacher of middle school. She was working for an all-girls middle school in Oakland, and
Hell of a place to be doing that.
after I got out of journalism school, I'm kind of like bumping around in freelance world a little bit. During the time that I was I was working in Romania with a population of homeless kids that live in the sewers in Bucharest.
There's a doc that I saw about this a number of years ago.
Children
of the Underground, of course.
Yeah, Edith Bellsberg. Amazing film.
Okay.
I know some of those kids. It just happened to be.
There you go. That's why I was like, now wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh God, that was when I saw that was a huge film.
That's an amazing film.
Documentary. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Amy came and visited me while I was there, and the way that the dynamic among those kids, between us, the outsiders, and those kids changed when Amy came on site. Like, I'd forged one kind of relationship with them, and when she came, a whole new segment opened up, and I got humanized by having a partner, and she got to the girls who'd been closed because of, traditional gender boundaries.
Totally.
And we both saw, like, to our fear and amazement, that something special happens when we work together.
Right. Okay. There it is.
Jump ahead a couple of years, and I just had this really clever notion that I should woo Amy away from her good, secure teaching job with healthcare and a paycheck, and come and do documentary filmmaking.
Why wouldn't one do that?
Yeah. What the heck? The economy's about to collapse, so why don't we start making films?
It's the perfect time to do that. Oh yeah.
So we did that. And we started, identified ourselves as nonfiction media and moved back. Introduced ourselves to Seattle's arts community, basically by just handing out documentaries. Like, you got an org that needs a film? We'll do it. And in the course of that, and then we sort of shot weddings. At the same time, still photography and weddings.
Of course, yeah.
A great way to keep your chops honed.
Yeah, absolutely. You're telling stories.
It's fun. It's hard work, but it's fun. I enjoy shooting weddings.
Yeah.
It's been a little while since we've done one, and I don't,
Yeah, it was hard work, and I didn't enjoy it. So
Didn't enjoy it?
I didn't do that very long. No.
Yeah.
Is there a competitive nature between you guys at all when you work together?
No.
Why?
Because it hurts more than it helps. We've organically developed and never really. This is actually it's on our list of things to do. It's to sort of write down our respective roles in our business.
Yeah.
Job description.
Yep.
Relative to nonfiction media. Relative to a big project. Sometimes one of us will take a lead on a project. Sometimes the other. Primarily, Amy writes and produces, and I shoot and do logistics. Yep. She directs. We co-produce.
Okay.
I mean, to put those very broad and nebulous terms to it.
Right, but often, of course, each other's wearing the other hat, and at any number of times.
If it has to do with gear, it's probably I'm the lead.
Got it.
If it has to do with hearts, Amy's the lead.
Okay. Are there any thoughts, anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to say? And by all means, also, please let us know how we can see Drawing the Tiger, the film that we've been talking about at length today. And then if you had any other thoughts or questions that you wanted to ask me.
The best way to see the film, we don't have it available yet for streaming. So the best way to do that is to just go to our website, drawingthetiger.com, and sign up for email updates. That way, when we do get it available for VOD or whatever, we'll be able to let everybody know that's signed up. Sign up to the Facebook page. It's facebook.com/drawingthetiger.
Yeah.
So super straightforward there. I wish I had a more exciting answer about that.
Do you guys have a timeline for distribution?
Well, we just signed an educational distribution deal with Women Make Movies. Great outfit. We're super excited about it. Okay. And there's a bit of a window where we're not going to be able to unless they decide it's what they want to do, it's not going to go up to video on demand for streaming anytime really soon.
Yeah.
But they are going to keep it in the public conversation somewhat, is the idea. And
yeah. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you, a pleasure to actually come up and meet you. I hope to meet Amy someday. I'd love for you to be able to meet my family as well. We're not that far apart.
I'm excited to have shared a conversation with you, Chris.
Yeah.
It's gratifying to talk to somebody who knows a little bit of the landscape where our film took place, and obviously gratifying that you speak so highly of it. So thank you. Thanks for undertaking to have the conversation.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. And I hope to do it again. It'd be great.
I'd like that too.
Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated, and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.